Company, my co-host.
You're listening to the WOL Radio Network, and of course it stands for We Are for Liberation and We Are for Love. We'll be right back where information is power.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Barbara Carlson and Friends Show.
On Election Day, 20% of people who went to the polls said they listen regularly to talk radio. And new research conducted by pollster Frank Luntz indicates those programs influenced how people cast their votes.
Post-election polling that we did showed that talk radio was perhaps the most important, the most significant factor in Republicans actually achieving the majority. Because the more that people listened to talk radio, the more likely they were to vote Republican. It used to be people thought talk radio would turn out the vote. Well, yeah, it does that to some extent. But it does change the way people look at politics, their leaders, their government, and Washington.
It is an industry that has grown to more than 1,000 programs, up from less than 300 talk shows 10 years ago. With advanced satellite technology and repeal of the fairness doctrine, talk radio has flourished. Broadcasters are no longer under a Federal Communications Commission mandate to air both sides of controversial issues. And in fact, many don't even try.
It is quite clear now that the Clinton blood is in the water, and the sharks are starting to circle.
In the weeks leading up to the election, talk show hosts like former Watergate burglar G. Gordon Liddy took sides in political contests, endorsing one candidate over another.
Let's go back to the telephones. Up next, from Spokane, Washington.
Right up to the eve of the election, Liddy tried to change voters' minds in the 5th Congressional District in Washington State, where Speaker of the House Tom Foley was running for his political life against Republican newcomer George Nethercutt.
Good morning, Spokane and Coeur d'Alene. This is Back Talk. This is the show that you love to love.
Liddy was not the only talk radio host promoting a Foley defeat. Back in Foley's hometown of Spokane, the airwaves were dominated by a sea of conservative voices urging voters not to send Foley back to Washington. In morning drive time, it was Todd Herman of business radio station KSBN who ridiculed the Speaker of the House.
Courtesy of the odious, eared one, the most corrupt man in the United States of America, Thomas S. Foley, the current sphincter of the House.
On another station, Mike Fitzsimmons also criticized Foley, but denied he was unfair.
I don't and did not in any time bash anybody.
Then in the afternoon came Spokane's most popular talk radio show host, Richard Clear, who endorsed Foley's opponent, Nethercutt, on his program.
During our coverage of the 5th District race and all the races on election night, the very first call that we got started thanking me, because George Nethercutt was so far ahead at that point, for what we had done here.
And when Clear had Foley on as a guest, this is what happened.
And I've got to tell you, the rumor mill is at it again. It's been around for years, and I thought maybe you'd want to take the opportunity to address it. People have stated even on this program that you are homosexual. Would you like to address that?
That's ridiculous. I mean, I think that's really bringing the campaign down to a pretty low level. I mean, the fact of the matter is that there's absolutely no truth to any of those terrible and slanderous suggestions.
Spokane television station KREM followed Foley on the campaign trail that day. But news director Paul Brandt kept the exchange between Clear and Foley off of the 6 o'clock news.
We didn't use the question and we didn't use the answer, mostly because we didn't feel that it was a credible question. There had been some rumors circulating for some time. Whether or not it's even important in the campaign, I think, is open for debate.
Was he out of line to ask the question in the first place?
In the context of news, I would say yes. Perhaps in the context of talk radio, maybe not.
Do you think that was a responsible question to place before him at that point? It was less than a week away from the election.
I think I would have been irresponsible had I not given him the chance, number one, to know that it had been brought up on my program, that people had accused him of that on the air, and given him the chance to respond to it in his own way, in his own time. So I think it was a very responsible thing by asking the question.
Well, I feel a sense of anger over a question like that. I think it's out of bounds. And I think
listeners have a sense of fair play and judgment, it would lead them to conclude that that was out of bounds.
David Wilhelm was until recently chairman of the Democratic National Committee.
I am concerned sometimes when the thugs get picked up by the mainstream media. I think there is kind of a problem in some sectors of talk radio when it comes to the facts, when it comes to credibility, when it comes to really crossing some threshold of credibility, when it comes to the factual content of what they're saying.
Don Hamilton is a Spokane freelance movie maker and film producer who agrees with Wilhelm.
You ride in the morning, all you can get is vitriol. All you can get is extremely rude and outrageous people making completely outrageous statements.
Hamilton was so upset with some of the things he heard on the radio that he invited himself on Herman's talk show one morning to defend Foley.
For me to suddenly want to trade in clearly a brilliant man, a constitutional scholar, a great man, so that Newt Gingrich can be happy. You know, the fact is, if we send George Nethercutt to Congress, it will be the very last message that this district ever sends to D.C.
See, I would just...
While Hamilton and a small group of his friends were trying to defend Foley from the barrage of criticism on the radio, other Spokane residents were organizing around talk radio to engineer Foley's defeat.
Well, talk radio was a real crucial element of this whole project. We really didn't anticipate that talk radio would generate financial backing for us, but in fact, that's exactly what happened.
Richard Hartman is a Spokane computer consultant who organized the Defoliate Project, a political action committee whose sole purpose was to defeat Tom Foley. As a regular talk radio listener, Hartman knew its power.
Now, here's a real hero. Here's a guy that really put it together, Richard Hartman with the Defoliate Project. How are you, sir?
Fine, wonderful. How are you doing?
Talk radio became an avenue for us to distribute information. We would fax the information that we obtained to all of the local network affiliate TV stations, to all of the local radio stations, to the newspaper, et cetera, et cetera. But the only ones that worked with that information most of the time were the talk radio show hosts. And they would bring them up as subjects, or they would read our faxes right over the air.
Terry Dunn and Sandra Barnett followed the Foley-Nethercutt race closely on talk radio. Dunn is an accountant who frequently listens to the talk shows while he's working. Barnett listens in her car on the way to her teaching job. And from what they heard on the radio, they decided to vote for Nethercutt.
I watch the local news for the weather and the football scores, but other than that, I don't turn my TV on anymore.
Is that because you don't like what they're giving you, or?
I feel that they're telling me what they think I should know. And I don't think anyone should have the right to tell anyone what they should know and what they shouldn't know. They should give us the truth. And I'm not getting that from NBC, ABC, or CBS, or our local news channels. So I went to talk radio.
I've come to the same conclusion as far as talk radio in regard to the type of information that we're getting. And I think that the talk radio does disseminate more valid information as far as the things that the general news media, such as the major networks and the newspapers, for whatever reason, glided over or didn't really get to the hard facts.
Chris Peck is the managing editor of the Spokane Spokesman Review, one of those mainstream media sources Dunn and Barnett are skeptical of.
If you had coverage of this campaign to do all over again from the get-go, knowing what you know now, what would you do different?
One of the things we would do would be bird dog talk radio more closely than we did. They got away with murder. They said a lot of things that were untrue, that were distorted. They said a lot of things that needed to be corrected.
And KREM News Director Paul Brandt says he is listening more carefully to criticism from his viewers.
I think as serious journalists, if we look at that phenomenon and understand what the danger of that is, I think we need to re-examine what we're doing and what we've done and what we're going to do. I think we talk a lot more about balance. We talk a lot more about covering the other side. We talk a lot more about whether we're slanted one way or the other.
Peter Brown is a Washington-based journalist who's interviewed 800 professional journalists for a book he's writing on media.
America is a suburban nation these days. Journalists don't live in suburbia.
If they do, they live in upscale ones close to the city where houses cost $300,000, $400,000, $500,000. They don't live in typical America. They are less likely to go to church. They are less likely to say they pray daily. And it produces a group mentality and a group think that leads to a product and a lifestyle that is out of sync with the mass of Americans. And that's why Americans increasingly don't read newspapers and are less likely to watch network news.
Pollster Lund says that's why more people are turning to talk radio.
It's almost like a catharsis. Finally. I mean, you feel great. When someone says something you believe in, you turn off that dial and say, there, I just spoke. Talk radio was ablaze the day after the election, with people talking about how significant it was that Republicans took control and how great the future was going to be. Never was heard a discouraging word on November 9th because people were so into it.
The new Republican congressional leadership is into it as well. Newly elected Speaker of the House, Newt Gingrich, says he has plans to meet monthly with talk radio hosts, who he says know how to read the pulse of the electorate better than traditional media.